Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the first Linux user group of it's July. Ah, yes, it is. It is July. Welcome to July, everybody. We are back and somewhat better than ever. We got I think a fairly fascinating topic. I don't know that any of I mean, I'm not sure what distros you guys use, but I think I may be the only one that actually uses an alternative Linux distro. So, um it'll be interesting to see what your guys' opinions on this stuff are. So, I have some questions. So, the topic for today is, I think phrased this is, you know, well, actually, what did I phrase it as? I don't even know. But should you use an alternative Linux distro? What is alternative Linux? And I have a few other questions. So first, I guess the question is, if we had to define what an alternative Linux distro is, what would it be, and what distros qualify? So, when I think of it, I think of NixOS and even things like Bluefin and Silverblue and things like that. So, I guess that's my answer to that question. Do you guys have anything like in terms of what you consider an out there Linux distro that you've ever tried, that you have experience with, or are you guys all kind of like set on in your ways? Anybody want to go first? Oh, that was a resounding no from everybody. Gary, go ahead.
It's like two kinds of. I don't understand it thoroughly yet, so it seems like there's two kinds of config files and that kind of thing. I haven't really tried any others, other than just some distro hopping and trying things on uh, machines that really are low powered and old. So, like I have Antix on another machine, another laptop. Anti-X or Antix Debian base, so I got to dip into Debian a little bit there, and that's about all I have for the
Okay.
moment.
All right.
Thanks.
True.
Some hold on, Matt. Sorry. Somewhere along the line, there's like a wind tunnel.
Yeah, Gary. Next time you talk, move your microphone down just a little bit. I think we're just hearing him breathe. Either
Okay.
that, or we're hearing his fan. Okay, go ahead, Drew.
I guess maybe the first thing we should probably kind of identify what what alternative distros that we're kind of like throwing into the mix. I guess Nix would definitely be one of them, Matt. And I mean, as far as I know, you're the only one here that can actually speak to that. But I would say that you know Vanilla OS would be one, and maybe Silver Blue, and if you really want like a mutable, then like Zorin, and stuff that's kind of like outside the purview of like your Arches and your Debian and your Fedoras and stuff like that of the world. But then there are these bases that come into play with some of these, let's just say either immutable, but definitely alternative distros. I don't know. Would you qualify, let's say, CachyOS as one? That could be a question. I don't know that I would say that Cachy is an alternative. It is gaming kind of specific, but I guess yes, Cachy would be kind of thrown into that category. Um, definitely the ones that are declarative, like Nix and so on. But
Yeah.
Would MX Linux be? Would Elementary? Would Anduin? Would Alpine? And what's the one that Jake uses, Matt?
Is that Void?
Yeah, Void. And so,
Yeah. Well, I guess the question is how. Maybe there's just degrees to it. So like when I first, I think, granted, this question has been on the poll for ages and ages, so I don't really remember what I was thinking when I put it on there. But I think I put the far out there ones, right? But
Yeah.
when you were talking, I was like, does using an alternative kernel qualify you as a alternative Linux distro, or eschewing System D, or like Alpine Linux where they don't use GNU, or Void or Gentoo where they don't really use System D by default, things like that. I'm not sure. Yeah, I didn't really consider that there would be degrees on it because I was considering it just like the weird ones, but I think it's actually a good question. Do the things that, if you're not like Debian or Ubuntu, are you an alternative Linux distro? And I don't know. GNU Linux, go ahead.
I don't have any experience with Nix and NixOS. I don't understand the use case, and I don't really like the idea of immutable distros because then you're stuck using Flatpaks, which I don't like either. So I haven't used either one of those, but I think I would include Puppy Linux, which I do have some experience with as an alternative distro or collection of distros, I should say, because they are a little bit different. They're made to run on a USB stick by default. They load it, the whole OS loads into RAM. And notably, if you do want to put it on a hard drive, which you can do, it's done in a so-called frugal installation, which means it sits in a directory of its own and with squash files that open up, and it doesn't necessarily span the entirety of a directory or of an entire physical hard drive, although you can't force it to do that if you want to. It's not the normal way to do it. The frugal way, so-called frugal way, is the way to do it. As a matter of fact, you can have a whole series of, if you were really into Puppy, you could have a half a dozen different puppies for different reasons, different configurations and stuff. So I think I would call that alternative as far as outside the norm.
Yeah, I think that like Slacks and Porteous and things like Linux, maybe even Linux Lite, things like that are kind of meant for different use cases. Or maybe what's the there's that one that you download and put on a USB disk to like recover your hard drive. Like is it I'm forgetting the name of it. It's like, it's not Disk Destroyer, that's DD. It's like the opposite of
Boot
DD.
repair.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. But there are things that are like have specific like pinpointed use cases that you would download and just put on a USB key in case you had to recover your hard drive or something like that. So yeah, I think that those would qualify as a alternative Linux distro. Um, we'll talk more about like the actual like when you use those here in a second. Des, go ahead.
So, I would not call mine an alternative Linux distro, but I do have a feature that NixOS has because I created the ability to do that through a universal package manager of my own creation. Um, and so I can basically declare the programs I want to install in config file, and I can install them with basically one command via an extension for that package manager. And I could almost not live without that anymore.
Mm. I find it interesting that because the last thing I expected from this conversation was to have a conversation about what an actual alternative Linux distro was. I mean, I did have that question on here, but I figured it'd be just easy to, while Nix is there, uh, Geeks, and Linux from scratch maybe. But the conversation about what it is actually really interesting because I think a lot of people probably assumed like I did, like that's what, if you're having a conversation about this, you're having a conversation about something weird. And I think that I appreciate you bringing it up, Drew, because you just mentioned like MX Linux. Like a lot of people use MX Linux, and maybe I was putting more of a comment weight on the word alternative than I was, in my head than what actually deserved to be there. And more of an assumption that alternative also meant rarely used, than what's actually true. So it's an interesting conversation. Drew, go ahead.
No, I was just trying to think of I mean, I'm coming up with more kind of like use case or specialized distros in my head. And by the way, is it Gparted or something like that, Matt, or Partition Magic or RescueZilla? I mean, there's
I
like
might be RescueZilla. I'm gonna look. Let me look.
Ultimate Boot CD type of thing. Or anyway, in my head also I came up with like, so there's the security there's the security like Kali type distros and stuff like that. Definitely specialized and definitely alternative, because I don't know that anyone, well, I mean, I don't know anyone, at least for that matter, that can use something like Kali like full time either. I think it's very specialized. You use it for specific things. But overall, identifying some of these like specialized use cases, and if you have used them even for a day temporarily to get what you need done, is kind of like a interesting idea. Like I would be curious if other people have like, it's like, okay, I had to repair something and I used X to like fix my hard drive or something like that. That kind of falls into the category as well.
Yeah, I think Clonezilla was the one that I was thinking
Okay.
of. Yeah. Gary, go ahead.
Is the wind tunnel gone?
No, it's better though.
Okay, I'll kill it after this.
Well, don't sweat yourself out of your room. It'll be okay.
No, it's not that terrible. I can just, well, whatever. Anyway, okay. The Kali Linux thing, from what I've heard, is it's mainly, its main purpose is for like pen testing and security things and stuff like that. And most of the people that have talked about it, it's like, you could daily drive it, but it's not recommended. It's like, don't use it for that. It's meant for security and pen testing people and that kind of thing. So that's just my what I've heard about it. Actually, I do have another one that's kind of semi. You talked about the gaming distro. So I have Nobara running also. It's Fedora based, but it's mainly for gaming. Just to make I identified that my GPU and my CPU and my computer cannot play games. So I need to fix that if I want to play games.
The gaming distros are interesting because there's just so many of them, and they all do things in some of them consider a custom kernel to be enough. Some of them have different tools and stuff. Some of them put priority on making NVIDIA work better, or have specific like Proton G. It was kind of developed alongside Nobara, I think. So overall, yeah, I think that the gaming distros are actually fairly interesting. GNU to Linux, go ahead.
I think you mentioned Clonezilla. I just wanted to say that I prefer Foxclone, and I have a tiny, ancient, 20-something-year-old 1 GB USB stick here, which fits Foxclone very nicely, and it has a GUI, and it's a really cool, uh, you know, device which you can use to clone your hard drive. Obviously, you have to, boot into USB to clone one of your hard drives. You can't do it while it's active. But if you want to clone one of your, like, say, your main system drive in your laptop or your desktop, you boot into this. And yeah, it has a very nice GUI. So it's friendlier than Clonezilla. And I like to recommend that to people.
Nice. Um, you, I'll be honest, usually by the time I'm to the point where my hard drive has failed, I've just given up all hope of everything and just, if I can salvage the hard drive, I reinstall something or I just buy a new hard drive, and reinstall from a backup somewhere along the line.
I like to do like once a quarter as part of my overall backup scheme. I like to do an image once a quarter of like my main laptop hard drive, just precautionary. The drive isn't in danger of failing that I know of, but yeah, I just think along with the other types of backups that I have, automated daily, backups and things like that, I just think it's wise to clone the whole drive. Now, I've never actually tested it, and like put it back on and make sure that worked, but I hope it works. But at least it's one of multiple types of backups I use.
Yeah. That's one of the cool things about MX Linux. MX Linux has this tool, I can't remember what it's called, but basically what it will do is it will create an ISO of your current working system. Now, it doesn't do like personal files, so you still have to, it's not like a backup solution. But it takes like all the programs and apps and stuff that you've downloaded, puts them on an ISO with MX Linux, and you can just reinstall basically your own version of MX Linux. That's always been one of those cool tools that MX Linux has. Drew, go ahead.
I think it's called like MX Snapshot. I think it's called Snapshot or something.
That's what it could be that.
Yeah.
I was thinking ISO Creator or something like that, but that's also something that I think that
I could be wrong.
that
I think it's called Snapshot or something.
Anyway,
regardless,
has,
I thought I don't want to steer the conversation on that, but I often think that whatever software that you're using for your NAS also kind of falls into the alternative, because you're not daily driving it, obviously. So anything that you're not kind of daily driving could also be considered an alternative. I don't want to add more, but basically I'm a big TrueNAS scale user, love it. And it allows me also to, in the way I set it up, it allows me to, even if my system gets corrupted and stuff like that, anything that's in my my main home directory is safe. I don't have a home directory that actually resides on my machine. So, and I know that you're a big believer in a kind of an alternative home structure as well. So it kind of like it's worth it. By the way, Butterbean not an alternative distro.
Oh, I forgot you were a distro maintainer too. For just about half a second.
Man, I can't believe I haven't been trolled yet, and yet I'm okay with that.
I'm trying to be less of an asshole. Okay.
Succeeding.
No. It's a work in progress. I'll probably fall off the wagon soon. Don't worry about it. The alternative, like Proxmox and stuff, because it's the ability to even to take like mainstream distros and do something different with them, like Proxmox or TrueNAS. Because TrueNAS is TrueNAS based on Debian?
No, it's actually based on Ubuntu right now, but Proxmox was at least Debian. They had Debian 13 before anybody else had Debian 13. They went straight to like the testing branch and made it like stable. I think D-Dubs can probably speak more intelligently about that, but yeah, I mean, Proxmox is Debian and TrueNAS, at least at this point, is Ubuntu.
Mm-hmm. So, from the conversation so far, it feels like what we've decided is that alternative Linux distros have specific purposes. Whether it's to run a NAS or a home server, to deal with virtualization, to be like an impermanence type thing, where Puppy Linux or Slacks or something like that, or Clonezilla, or even something a little bit more broad like MX Linux, where their goal is if you don't like systemd or something like that, or something like Void, where you have alternative ways of using things. And we've also mentioned gaming distros where they have a very either a broad this is gonna be a stupid thing to say, a broadly specific for thing to that they're focusing on, or very specific thing that they want to focus on. So I guess the question I have for the rest of you guys, or for everybody here, is of the very broad selection, very broad selection of options of alternative Linux that we've mentioned today. What ones have you tried and had a need for, and have you enjoyed any of them? So, since I'm the only Nix guy here, I will talk about Nix while you guys ponder your answers. So today is day 365 of Nix. Exactly 1 year. And I know Nate in the chat was talking about how he wants to try it, but he wants to actually be able to see the benefits of it. And I've been using it for a year, and I still can't tell you what the benefits are. That doesn't mean I don't like NixOS, and it's not that I can't see some benefits sometimes for using it. But if I were to go to like a regular normie Linux user, like I don't know, Drew, and try to convince him to use NixOS, without being a troll, like you know what I mean, like have an actual conversation, like, Drew, I'm trying to convince you to use NixOS. I don't think I could do it, and not just because you're so set in your ways in terms of Debian.
Challenge accepted.
Like, even if you were like, let's say for some reason Debian just decided to crap the bed, and you're like, I'm looking for a new Linux distro, and I want, Matt convinced me to use NixOS. I don't think I could do it, simply because the Nix is huge. You have. It feels like you can't go into it without already knowing what you need it for. Like, do you need it for replication, on across multiple machines? In which case, it works fantastic for that. Do you like configuring things, even if it's just a simple thing like you like configuring everything in a configuration file? Maybe that's what your goal in life is, right? Then NixOS is good for you. But if you don't have something specific, if at least it feels for me so far, that if you don't have a specific need for it already going into it, it may not be for you unless you're just tinkering to try to figure out that reason. Which in that case, that is the reason to use it, because you're trying it out. There's no selling point I can point to on NixOS that would apply to a broad swath of people. Everything is very narrow and specific towards specific use cases, whether it's the replication, whether it's the broad package selection in some cases. I feel like everything is just very narrow in terms of its use case and potential audience, which is, like I said, none of the stuff I'm saying is like, oh, it makes it a bad distro or bad operating system. It's more, it's not something you could put on a billboard and say, hey, this is why you should use it over Ubuntu or Debian or Linux Mint or something like that. D-Dubs, go ahead. Don't forget to unmute yourself, bud. Did D-Dubs forget how to unmute himself?
He says audio issue in the chat.
Okay. Linux audio issues. Imagine that. Des,
I had that last week.
Yeah. It flows. The last time before it was Greg. So, Des, go ahead.
So, by our definition, some alternative Linux distros that I've definitely used, I have used Kali for at least a class, and then I've used DDWRT, that's a pretty frequent one, and whatever Linux distro they're running on the Buffalo NASes that I have in my house. And the other ones like Mageia would not be alternative distros according to this that I use on my servers. But at least those other three that I've used before frequently enough.
Okay. Anybody else have one? Drew, go ahead.
So I think that there's also, I'm a Debian user, clearly, and I have tried others in the past. Artix was one, and Artix is an Arch-based distro that does not use systemd. So that's kind of an alternative thing. It was a little challenging, frankly, for me and this is years ago, and I'm sure it's much better now. But even to decide, am I going to use sysv? Am I going to use OpenRC? Am I going to, how do I do this? And so that brought some challenges. As far as what I am using today, or like more recent use cases, like I said before, TrueNAS is something that I've used over a long period of time. Even before that, I tried Unraid, and I prefer TrueNAS. I mean, there are, again, even with that, there's some alternatives that you can, and actually I wanted to mention that D-Dubs in the chat said Azure Linux, which is, I think it's built by Microsoft, in fact, as well as there was something else. Can't remember. It doesn't matter. So anyway, I have used gparted as an ISO before. That's simply to like strip out like whatever hard drive. That is based on Debian, like a really stinking old version. And then, you've got the servers that we use. Some of those, and Ubuntu server. So those I would, and Debian just as a server. So I wouldn't consider either one of those alternative in any way, shape, or form. But at the same time, I really I think that sometimes sticking to the tried and true for certain situations is 100% the play. Sometimes I think there are alternatives, and to add to your cred, your your Linux cred, you're like, I'm on some other strange distro that presents more problems than there are solutions. But to each his own. Kali Linux and stuff like that, I've also wanted to try. And then what's the other one that's like really super? Tails has been something that I've tried in the past as well, just for fun type thing.
One that I've always wanted to try is actually Cubes, the one that everything runs in a VM for security reasons. It seems like it would be really fun to use. I've just never actually, pressed the button on it and tried to figure out how to get it to work. I know there were a few people in the Discord that have actually tried that and actually run it as a daily driver. I don't think that I could ever be that person, because I don't know how well it would work with gaming, but it would be an interesting thing for like a laptop. I think that one of the things that I've been thinking about as we've talked about this is that we sometimes, as I get in my comment section a lot, Linux is a hobby. And people tell me this, and I both agree with that and disagree with it. I think it can be both a hobby and something that where you get actual work done. I think that it can qualify as both things. But I think sometimes when I put my hobbyist hat on, I forget that Linux also has specific use cases sometimes. And for a lot of people, I see them doing very interesting things with you name it, whether it's just regular Debian or they're dealing with Proxmox. I mean, I think it was a few lugs ago. I think D-Dubs shared his screen for his Proxmox. Maybe it was D-Dubs, and he has this whole list of stuff along the side, like all these containers and LXC containers and VMs and stuff. Like that's really really cool. Like you're doing really cool stuff there. And I know a lot of people who use Proxmox like that. And like when I used Proxmox, I had one VM. That's why I stopped using it. Like I didn't put it through its potential. I was just using one VM for everything. And that's the reason, because I just store it. It didn't make sense for me to have everything in its own VM. I just put everything in a Docker container. Because Docker's awesome.
By the way, going back about, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes, Gary, Matt and I both used Nabara for about a week as a part of our challenge, or I guess it was a review. It really wasn't a challenge. So we were basically reviewing Nabara, and I think we had mixed feelings about that. But then again, talking about the gaming use case, I'm not a gamer, so I didn't find that to be a benefit,
What were we thinking assigning Drew a gaming distro? like we should have that we either we can't even say that was when you were new, because I'm pretty sure that was like a year in or something.
It wasn't, I didn't think it was that long ago, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's just like we should have known better. It was okay. All right, D-Dubs, did you get your audio fixed?
I hope so.
Yeah, you did. Good. Excellent.
It actually was my browser. Audio, everywhere else, audio worked fine. And I was like, so I literally switched machines going, I'll figure that out later. Because it wouldn't even show that I had a microphone. It was really bizarre.
Very weird.
Anyway, I was going to say Azure Linux would be a really good, I think, example of an alternative. It's you can still do a lot with it, but it's really focused on VMs, container services, and it does that very, very well. Another one is actually NixOS based. It's an interesting concept, very well executed, but even as a Nix user, for me, it kind of missed the mark a little bit. Is called GLF OS. It's a French distro of NixOS, full installer, KDE. It has every gaming thing you'll ever need. It has Steam, it has Lutris, it has even ones I didn't even know existed, all pre-configured. Works right out of the box. It's kind of amazing, but they hit it so well and they buried it so well. It's like you can't easily go in and turn some of these things off. You can add packages, easy as anything, but it was just interesting that this idea where you could hyper focus something in Linux and make it work amazingly well, whether it's Debian based, NixOS based, Arch based, I don't care what it's based on. But that's kind of an amazing thing to me about Linux. And when I hear somebody say like hobbyist, I go, do you realize the vast majority of the internet runs on Linux? It's not just because it's free. These people can afford it.
Mm-hmm.
If it didn't work, it would cost them more, than going to something that did. So I'm trying to think of some other ones, but those were two that really popped out. Just briefly on Kali, it is kind of interesting. I get people trying to run Hyperland on Kali. And there are some technical issues to it, but I'm like, why are you running Hyperland on your penetration testing? You really want everything geared towards penetration testing. The lowest GUI overhead possible. So I just thought it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, just briefly. You asked me before about Azure. It's actually been working kind of amazing. I'm still a bit shocked. I've just left it in the background. It's been running for weeks now. Every once in a while, I update it. It's like it's kind of like running Debian stable, Drew. There's hardly any updates because there's hardly any other extraneous services running on it.
Originally, though, didn't you say that it was more of a like a Proxmox type of like use case?
Yes, absolutely. Its sole purpose is to run services, containers, VMs, Docker, or Podman, whatever you want. It is the way they tune the kernel, the way they tune everything on this thing. It's basically would be extremely difficult even to add a GUI because they have stripped out like everything. It is really designed for that thin service where you would just have hundreds and thousands of these things running. Kubernetes. That was the other thing I was thinking about. Was they'd be running Kubernetes. So, like I say, if it didn't say MS on it, I think more people would use it. And there are some good Linux people at Microsoft, but it's just, I almost wish Microsoft had spun it off. Built a little LLC, a little, yes, it's owned by, but it reminds me of when IBM created the PC. They did it like as a skunkworks project down in Florida. They pulled it out of the IBM system because if it was built in the IBM way, it would not have been built at all, and we'd have no PCs as we have today.
The Azure Linux actually reminds me of the what was it, Clear Linux from Intel? Was that what it was called? I think.
Yeah.
So it kind of reminds me of that. I don't know in terms of use case.
Clear Linux was terrible.
Was it? Yeah. I never tried. It just reminded me of like a big corporation who decided that they're going to do their own Linux distro for a very specific purpose. I think Intel's purpose was to be it as compatible with their hardware as possible, whereas obviously Azure's trying to be more like server oriented or something like that. So
yeah, because just to tag on that is Clear. Like I say, Clear was poorly kind of conceived. I lost my thought. Sorry.
That's fine. Gary, go ahead.
Actually, what I thought the Azure Linux was Fedora based, and I've heard other uses for it. Okay, so I was right on that. I've heard other uses on it. I don't know enough to actually. I'm not going to counter anything you've said because I, from what I'm recalling, I got a different vision of it, but I'll have to revisit that. It's interesting, but it's one of those things. I do agree with you on the Microsoft thing. It's like, oh, it's Linux and Microsoft, go away, but even though it may be a good thing to use.
If you never use like Ubuntu server or even just using Debian, where you literally loaded no GUI, you stripped out as much as possible and made it as bare essential. Tune the kernel parameters, tune the service, for services work and so forth. That's what they've done here. They've done a lot of work for you ahead of time. Because Fedora does have a server as well,
right?
But this is actually better than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've done CentOS server. Some years ago with no GUI. So.
Right, but the thing, because I did that as well because it's Red Hat based, and as I used to use Red Hat Enterprise for a long time, even when you installed it, you had to go in and tweak it. There was all those system settings to change, TCP window sizes and all these other things that you had to do, and they kept like the default scheduler out of the box, and then you had to decide which one did you want to use. Am I running a VM or am I running a DB and so forth? This seems a little more out of the box, better tuned.
All right, cool. Then the other comment I had was Drew was mentioning about the gaming thing. Yeah, I'm not a gamer either, but people like Matt in their farming adventures have kind of sucked me in on that. It's like, I enjoyed what you did last night. I didn't chime in, but it's amazing how peaceful and enjoyment. It just distracts me, and I really enjoyed it. And so I always look for that, and including your phantom crashes on the bridge.
That was really weird, dude. It's like that map has some kind of hitboxes in the middle of that bridge, and I don't know why. I almost went. That first time with the mother. Don't get me started on farming. I will take over the LUG, and that's just what we'll talk about the whole time.
I didn't want to do that either, so I thought maybe I shouldn't mention it, but it's too much. It's too funny. So yeah, I think what would you install on Fedora for gaming? Proton or Steam? I forgot what I did. And it was a big flop. So I put I because it's Fedora based. That's why I chose Navarro. And
Is Fedora your like daily driver preferred distro?
it is, yeah. I mean, there's others I would like, and like I said, I did it in case because of its relationship with Red Hat, and if I have the opportunity
Mm.
to. Red Hat seems to be, in my experience at work, if they're using a Linux server, it's going to be Red Hat. I know there's other options, but Debian, OpenSUSE, Ubuntu, but usually it's in our shop. It was Red Hat. So I picked a Navara, and just to verify, I got the game to run, if you could call it that. It just kind of looked at me and did nothing. So it's like, okay, my equipment is crap. So anyway,
Mm.
that's where that went. So okay, thanks.
Yep, Des, go ahead.
If I can quit needing to mess with Home Assistant and all my servers, I do have an Ansible now that's completely free for me to be able to experiment with Linux all I want now. And so I can do a bunch of tests now. So that's pretty cool.
Nice. Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, first time in here in quite a while, so hi everyone. So yeah, I've played around with a lot of distros over the years. I can't even remember most of the alternative distros I played around with back in like 2011, 2012 area, but there was a ton. I'd say there's primarily like two categories of alternative because alternative is such a wide term and it's entirely relative. Alternative to what? Alternative to what Linux? Alternative to what feature? You know. I would say like probably like one of the more truer definitions of an alternative would be uh, um, something that's like thanks camera trying to do stuff something that is trying to say that like yeah this can be your primary distro, this is like the best as the main thing, but like is some random one that hardly anyone uses. I can't even remember most of the ones that are named like that right now. But then there's the purpose specific ones, which has been what a lot has been talked about here. I haven't used Kali in forever, but I definitely used Kali back in the day, or originally Backtrack before that. Back in like 2010, 2011, I used to before my dad and I could afford internet. I used to hack neighbors' Wi-Fi's with Backtrack in order to actually get internet access. So that was always fun. I loved using AV Linux for random AV tasks and stuff like that. I'm surprised to see that AV Linux is actually still in the top 100 on DistroWatch because I don't hear it ever talked about anywhere anymore. Um, I don't remember what it was called, but there was an anime focused Linux, which wasn't like that great or anything. But we used to use that for the video rooms at a convention I used to help run in Idaho called Vandemonium. We had anime showing rooms, and we just thought it was kind of fun to have an anime Linux on those computers in order to just run VLC and just play anime all day. Um, but yeah, like there's so many ways to think about alternatives because what is normal to us or what is our main focus may be what's alternative to someone else and vice versa. Um, so yeah.
Cool. So when I think of the ones that, so I too have obviously used quite a few distros in my day, but it's hard. it's so like I've tried AV Linux, but for a video, right? And I tried so like a Ubuntu. I think was it called Ubuntu Studio? I'm not even sure if it still exists. I think it does. It's kind of more like the media focused Ubuntu, right? And Ubuntu also has these little dedicated like thin client based versions of their distro that are specific for like kiosks, I think is what they call them, and uh, uh, that are very specific for running on like Internet of Things stuff, and they're almost entirely Snap based. Now I never used any of those, but I've read quite a bit about them, and it's one of the things that always like D-Dubs was talking about. I know the hobby part came from me, but that's just because that's a comment that I get on my videos all the time. Like, oh, Linux is a hobby; it doesn't do real things. And sometimes I fall into that too, because I mean, I spend all my time. Like I spent last night trying to get Hyperland to work for the upteenth time and failing yet again. Just because it's a piece of whatever. But I that's obviously wasn't real work. So I sometimes fall into this idea where I'm just ricing all the time. Like that's all I use Linux for. But then I also like can pull myself out and like remember that I actually do actual real work on here sometimes, and people do real work all the time, and very interesting projects and development work and video editing and all this stuff. And the thing I'm constantly surprised at is that people will take Ubuntu or Debian and put work and effort into making it into something different. It's not just an alternative distro that's basically just Arch, but with a different skin on top of it, which there are many of. So, what the hell is that? Oh, there we go. Sorry, Chris, you were causing some beeping there. Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree on the. It's definitely you can do business with it, personal or enterprise. You can get real work done on it. It's great for that. I mean, that's why I have a Windows running in Winboat just because I support some other people and I need to keep up on it. And it's horrible, but and it's also a fantastic hobby. I just really love all the different things and when I first got into it and started using the apps, the just to play music, the first one that popped up, and it was like, oh, this is like a trillion times better than Windows Media Player because it starts right away and it is looks better, you know. And I had something else on my oh, here's something for an odd. I don't know if you'd call it a distro. I guess it is in a way. So I managed Shortel Systems in the company I worked at, was the administrator. All of their appliances, phone switches, and stuff like that. They run Wind River Linux.
What's that?
So it's called Wind River Linux, but when you're into it, it has its own shell. I mean, it has its own little line command thing, but it just takes regular Linux commands and you can maneuver through it and do what you need to do with whatever you need to do to the switch that you can't do from the director's GUI. So I don't know. I never heard of it up and only from those appliances. I think they've changed it to something else now, but I don't know. I don't remember what it is. So that's all.
That's fine. So, go ahead.
So that was a mistake. Sorry.
No, that's fine. D-Dubs?
I was going to say Wind River is actually an RTOS, I believe, too, where it's hyper focused for latency sensitive tasks. Because it didn't used to be. There used to be a Wind River, but it wasn't based on Linux. There's a few of those out there. That would actually be qualifying as an alternative for sure. Hyper tuned kernels, with deterministic latency scheduler. So again, a very, very just showing the flexibility of Linux.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So the question I guess I have for the panel now is is there so we've talked about both very specific use cases for alternative Linux and some more broader use cases or broader distros that are multi-purpose, right? So things like Nix or things like that. Do you guys think that the outside of the specific very narrow case use distros like Clonezilla, TrueNAS, things like that, where you wouldn't daily drive them, obviously, the ones that are daily drivable, do you think that there's a legitimate reason for broad public usage of some of these things for very specific reasons, like whether it's because systemd is bloated or because configuring things in the config files fun, whatever the reason may be? Do you think that there's a reason for, I'm not gonna say mass adoption, but more popular adoption of alternative Linux distros? GNU to Linux, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that they take the definition of alternative aside. There are, let's call, less popular or more obscure general purpose Linux distros that I've found a use specifically, for example, if you have an older computer, 15 or 20 years old, and only has 2 or 4 gigs of RAM, I'm not necessarily going to put my preferred Linux Mint on it because it's going to kind of struggle if it's that old and has that little RAM. But there are quite a few options for so-called lightweight Linux distros. They're not purpose built for a specific purpose. They're general purpose distros, but they're made to maybe the combination of the distro and the desktop environment is made to be ideally suited for a computer with less RAM. In the past, for me, that used to be Bodhi OS,
Mm-hmm.
Ubuntu based, and it uses a desktop environment called Moksha, and it ran really well, even with as little as 2 gigs of RAM on an old Core 2 Duo computer that I used to have. I finally got rid of that to recycling, but I have, for example, a 17-year-old laptop with 4 gigs of RAM that I got on Craigslist just to play with as a backup for my multiple other computers. And I put something on it recently because it was so old and had so little RAM. I put on something called Quark OS, which is also Ubuntu based, and it uses the Trinity desktop environment, which is really made to use very little RAM. It's easily half of what Cinnamon or GNOME or some of the other more popular DEs would be. So I think those would, in a way, kind of qualify as alternative because you're using them specifically because they're so lightweight.
Is Trinity the one that's based on KDE3?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I don't think I've ever tried that, but I've always been curious about it because I wasn't really around in the KDE3 days. I remember I think I used KDE2. I'm not even sure if that's what they called it. Back in the day when I used SUSE Enterprise Linux, like in 2002 or something weird. Anyways, Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, I think like low power computers is a great example to use. Like slightly different distributions that are not like crazy specialized in anything other than just being like a little bit more lightweight. Back in the day, I used to really love initially Xubuntu was like my go-to, and I still have a soft spot for XFCE. It was just always to me like the great balance of like looking good but like being customizable, whereas LXDE at the time just I could not get that looking very good at when I was like 16, 17, 18. And it just wasn't that much more lightweight than XFCE. But there was one distribution at that time that was Ubuntu based that did look good and like just felt right with LXDE, and that was Watt OS. I believe it's been revived somewhat recently, but its whole thing was trying to be low power, hence Watt. um, And I used to get so many old XP and prior era machines running with that, and that was good for a time. And a lot of these various distros are like not good always for a long time, but are great for the moment in time that you're using them for. Um, and to that effect, like there is uh, I'm meaning to play around with Alpine a little bit more because Alpine has one of the only well-maintained 32-bit releases still, and I have some really crappy point of sale tablets that are actually 64-bit processors but 32-bit BIOS, and only have 2 gigs of RAM. And so like until I can actually like rip the BIOS off of that and send that over to someone to reformat it and to create an actual 64-bit BIOS for those machines, I am wanting to do something with those and get those working somewhat well if I can on Linux. And the only way to do that is with a 32-bit distro. And most of the major 32-bit distros aren't really a thing anymore. And I'd love to throw Arch on there, but like the last I saw of like a 32-bit Arch was not much of a thing. And so Alpine is looking kind of appealing to me on that front. But I've definitely ran into a couple like just general usability issues on my first attempts doing that some time ago. But I just need to brave up and spend some time and go into that some more.
Well, Drew?
Can I if I was to restate what you asked the question originally, would it be like, is there a reason for alternative or for more popular adoption? Is that what?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that in terms of where at least I am in a Linux journey, and maybe many of you, is I've stopped distro hopping. You know, I don't do that anymore. You find what works for you, especially within a specific workflow, and then you just rock with that. You know, the thing that, is it good to have these alternatives? 100% yes. And I think it's because I think there is kind of a death of the one size fits all. You know, Ubuntu and many of these other ones were designed to be everything to everyone. And I think modern computing lends itself, is becoming more fragmented. The jack of all trades distribution kind of sometimes feels sluggish to some people, especially if you are a gamer. And I wanted to make sure I mentioned that even though I am not a gamer, the adoption of some of these CachyOS, Bazite, things like that are, the adoption of those particular distros with a really tuned kernel and so on has brought more people into the Linux space. And that is a good thing. So, even when we're talking about like Steam OS and things like that, specialized, very specialized and alternative. And I think that has lent itself to Linux overall being more widely adopted. I don't know if I said that right, but there you go.
Made sense. I do think so. I specifically like SteamOS specifically has led to more people trying Linux, even if it's by accident, right? They download, they get a Steam Deck and they're using Linux. Then maybe they don't even know it. They just bought it and are playing games on it, and then that leads to some people eventually being able to stumble their way into actually using it on other things, which is, I think it's a great thing. I think Bazai has had that in a somewhat more nerdy fashion because you actually have to know how to install it. But once you get past that, it also leads in. It's like we call those a gateway drug. You know what I mean? It's like you start off on a distro that somebody else installed for you, and then it leads you into becoming a Linux nerd. LinuxCast.store. Sorry, I had to do that. the thing I find very interesting about a lot of things is that when you find yourself using, like, let's say you start off on Linux Mint, which either you start off on Linux Mint or you start on Ubuntu. Those seems to be like the distros that you start off on. And you've gone past like the hard part. Like, you've installed Linux, you've crested the hill, and you're on the easy part now, at least in theory. I think what leads people to distro hop a lot of the times, not always, but sometimes, is that need to find their specific alternative Linux distro that fits their own use case, right? Whether it's a specific way a desktop environment works, or specific tooling. Maybe they're looking for something that has some things like MX Linux has. Maybe they find that they don't really like SysMD, which seems like a really nerdy problem to have, but I'm sure it probably exists for some people. Or maybe they have specific audio and visual needs, so they need to try something like AV Linux or Ubuntu Studio. They're content creators of some kind, music or video. They have a very specific use case, and I think that that's where quote unquote alternative Linux thrives, because you start off on the ones that are mainstream, and then you find you have a very specific need for something that more broad use case doesn't actually fulfill without having to do a bunch of tinkering. You want something that works more out of the box. I think that when I'm thinking of the question that I asked and apply it towards the more mainstream alternative Linux distros, Nix, Geeks, Vanilla Linux, things like that, or Vanilla OS, I guess it's called. I think to try to answer my question, it's hard to say, you know what, doing something so completely differently like Nix does, or even like Gentoo. Like Gentoo is more of a traditional Linux distro in that it, once you set it up, it very functions like a regular distro, but the setup of it is so different than everything else, and the maintenance of it is so different than everything else. Like, I think it qualifies as an alternative. And can you point someone towards Gentoo and say, hey, this is the use case for this particular operating system, more people should use it? And I think that that's a really hard thing to do for a lot of the more different distros like Nix and Gentoo and things like that, mostly because they're just, for me, they're really hard sells to people who are just regular users. Like, you can't, like, unless you know some of the problems that they have, you can't really tell them, like, hey, this will solve this problem, unless you know what the problem is that they're having. And I think that's why a lot of the times, like Nix OS specifically, because I just have the experience with that, the way people get into it is they try it first and they discover that they like it. It's never like, very rarely is it like, oh, this is going to solve this very specific problem for me, I'm going to try it because it's going to do that. It may end up solving a problem for you, but you tried it mostly because of curiosity, because it's so different. Linux does have this culture of being very contrarian for a lot of people. Like, the systemd haters are a lot like this. Like, there's a reason why, like, Dev1, like a lot of people's argument against systemd is because it's bloated, right? And whether that's an actual like thing is up for debate, but they're contrary in that they will have created this entire community surrounding different init systems, and they do it just because they don't like one certain thing. I mean, and that's really the heart and soul of open source, right? You create something because the thing that came before it didn't suit your fancy. Linux Mint is an example of this, right? They didn't like what Ubuntu did, so that they took Ubuntu and they made it in their own image. Pop OS, things like that. If that mentality didn't exist, everybody would be using Slackware or Debian. Drew would be happy, but I'm not sure the rest of us would be. So, Cody, go ahead.
Only place I use Slackware is my Unraid server because that's based on Slackware. But and the only reason I use Unraid is because I have a bunch of disks of different size, and that's what that's good for. Otherwise, I would use TrueNAS. But yeah, no, a few points there. I do think it's SteamOS has really definitely gotten a lot more people to try Linux, whether they realize it or not. And so I have a friend who recently got a Steam Deck, and they've been enjoying it, having a great time. And then they were starting talking to me about an old 2013 MacBook Air. It's like, well, yeah, we can get that thing, usable for basic things. There's two routes. Like what for one, you should not use that on the internet as it is because it's just very insecure with the old versions of Mac OS. But like there's two options here. We can hack it up to a later version of macOS and it'll run like crap, but it'll have security updates and could maybe do some web browsing. Or we could put Linux on it. And then her boyfriend's like, "Oh no, trying to convert to Linux, no!" And it's like, well, actually, you're already a Linux user because you're using a Steam Deck. You don't even realize it. And the distribution I would want to put on their old MacBook would be Fedora Kinoite, which would be a very similar experience to the SteamOS, just without the gaming stuff on it. I would think that some immutable distributions, somewhat like that, have really taken the spot that Mint used to for me, for getting people into Linux who have no interest in the tech, or they just want something usable that just works and is easy. Um, at this point, it's easier to me to use Fedora Kinoite than it is to use Linux Mint, because with Linux Mint, you still have to see the updater, hit the updater, and do that. With Kinoite, it is entirely in the background. It can just automatically do everything during reboots. Um, the rare thing is the major version upgrade. I think you do have to go in and hit like two buttons for, but yeah, so there's that space. And then like distro hopping to really find that alternative that's good for you. Like I would say that when I was distro hopping a ton back in the day, that was my learning experience. Like I had just pretty freshly been exposed to Linux, and finally had the autonomy to like download stuff and like go and try out different things. And so I was trying out dozens of different distros just to see what every little difference was. I didn't understand things under the hood almost at all, but just some of the visual differences, how things were structured, how things were presented. It was definitely a big thing that helped to make me more interested and then get me deeper in later on. Um, and I want to say it was PCOS Linux. I might be wrong, but I want to say PCOS Linux back in like 2012 or something like that had like a special mode that you could go into that was most of the major desktop environments all in one session. And you could go to the different virtual desktops, and they would be the different desktop environments. So you'd go to one virtual desktop, it'd be KDE, go to there to be GNOME, another LXDE, and like I might be wrong. It may not have been PCOS Linux, but I want to say it was them, and that fascinated me. And really, even though like that didn't run very well, probably because everything was loaded, but that got me interested into the other desktop environments and got me playing into a lot more alternative Linuxes after that.
Cool. Drew, go ahead.
While Cody was talking, and the word popularity just kept kind of like in my head, because it was an interesting, like, okay, going to Kinoite, for example, is not what you would consider, I think, a natural a natural progression for specific use case. I mean, it would be for specific use cases, but Cody knows enough to not really kind of fall into the popularity or the marketing barrel, because most of the Linux world adoption often follows utility and not marketing. So, like I'm going to say, sound stupid here for a second, but I don't care. So Ubuntu is popular because it is kind of the baseline for the tutorials and that we see on the internet constantly. It's like if you do a search for a problem, there's going to be a Ubuntu tutorial attached to that. Arch is popular because it provides the most comprehensive documentation. The Arch Wiki is maybe the gold standard, period, which users of other distros read to fix their own systems, basically. Mint and Zorin are popular because they offer the least amount of friction for non-technical users to move from Windows to Linux. And so the popularity thing in my head is like, okay, well, these are the reasons for that. So why would users move off of those to alternative distros? And it's because maybe they've hit the ceiling in these mainstream ones. And if you're happy with that distro, then there's really no reason to change. But when your OS begins to work against you for specific workflow, like storage reliability, or you want immutability, the alternative ends up being kind of a functional necessity. So I don't know. I'm throwing shit out there and see what sticks, basically.
I think you're right. I think that there's like two reasons why you leave the path most traveled, right? Either it's pure curiosity, like, oh, NixOS looks cool, or Vanilla OS looks cool, or you have a very specific reason why your current setup isn't working for you the way that you want it to, right? And I mean, maybe there are other reasons, but those seem like the two main reasons why you'd leave something behind that was, maybe was working fine, but it doesn't quite meet your needs as is. And or you just like install. I guess there is a third reason. You just like installing Linux over and over again, and that just just move around a whole bunch of times. That was me for a long time. Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the point of like hitting a wall is a great point. That I didn't address. So I have a friend who is sometimes using Mint right now, but keeps going back to Windows. And it's because he's running into problems with not certain features not being there, and really he's running into the walls of Cinnamon, and that's the biggest limitation. But because it's Mint, he's not able to get like the newer versions of KDE, or not able to go to other things nearly as easily. So like a number of his Linux friends are trying to massage him over to a different distribution with our assistance, but he just keeps mainly going back to Windows, unfortunately. Um, and then my other point, just expanding on like the friction and having less friction. And I would definitely say immutability is not the thing that most of the super techie people want in their distributions, unless they're doing something that is where that would be useful specifically. It's like some sort of building or some sort of testing that they want to make sure that it could affect something. So it's just 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 keep it from breaking the thing. But for the people who don't know or care about any of it, it's a huge it's strength. And just having that little bit less friction with updates, and or if something breaks, the auto reversion, as opposed to the snapshot system. Snapshot is awesome. I love snapshotting. It like is so great. But for most regular people who get scared of technology, um, getting kicked back to grub or something and having to go into a snapshot and then do something to restore that as their main thing. Like, that's a whole can of worms that they would never want to touch and would scare them away from things for like ever. But having an immutable system, or just any system that can do an A/B system where it'll auto revert to that previous update state, is just so much less friction. And they may not even realize something went wrong or something broke because of the way that works. They don't need to realize the updates are happening or what they are, because they're automatic. And so like yeah.
Drew, go ahead.
So I'm going to ask a very Debian question, because transitioning people off of a specific distro because they need the latest version of KDE, to use your example, is that still a thing? And the reason why is because I'm saying this, it used to be a big deal. I don't know that it's a big deal anymore. And maybe I'm wrong, and I want to be educated about that, because when you were several years ago, you were waiting. I mean, you were legit waiting on that newest version because it wasn't mature enough to actually like help your workflow. It was actually hindering your workflow because of some of the bugs associated, because of some of the packages that were required. And now, as the more mature these projects get, I don't know that it is as big a deal. Is 6.6 KDE so much worse than 6.7 that it's required that you okay all right okay that it's required that you be on that kind of bleeding edge on that bleeding edge distros, because you're legit waiting on the newest version of thing? In my opinion, I'm a window manager user that uses something that hasn't been touched in 10 years. So there you go. I mean, that gives you my idea of stability. I want something that's stable. That's the bottom line. But I'm just curious as to why people would move from a more stable, maybe older packages to like being on that bleeding edge because they're waiting on some kind of like something new. I guess maybe that's just the better way to frame it.
Okay, so I'll let D-Dubs go here in just a second, but I think for me personally, I'm with you, Drew. I want my system to work and be stable. That's the reason why I've chosen the stable branch of NixOS. But there are certain packages where I do prefer the more recent versions, just because the software tends to be a little bit buggy, and if you want bug fixes, you have to get updates. So specifically like Vivaldi. Vivaldi introduces bugs all the time, every once in a while. It's not all the time, but quite a bit. Things breaks because it's a huge project, and every once in a while there's just stuff that goes wrong. Right now there's a stupid VPN bug that I keep getting notifications for. I just want it to go away. If I were on this like the stable version that doesn't get any updates, I'd have to wait 2 years to get those fixes. Whereas with something that's more unstable, not unstable, more actively updated, I'd get those fixes faster. But I'm much less than before. Like I used to be an Arch guy, and I loved having the bleeding edge of everything. Now there's just very specific packages I'm there. Everything else I'm 100% okay. Like Plasma, actually Plasma is kind of like an exception to that. I want Plasma to lag behind the new one. Like I'm very happy to be a version behind on Plasma, because the new one is just going to invite more bugginess, not less. But Plasma is just buggy, so that's just the way that it is. Anyways, D-Dubs, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah, KDE. Well, we'll stick with the KDE theme because it does illustrate the difference between those who have used Linux and enjoy what it does versus some of the newer people that are really focused on the eye candy or the effects or what have you. Because I see people all the time wanting that very latest. Because every release of KDE says bug fixes, faster, better, more features every single time. That is what their selling point is. So if you're having issues with 6.5, 6.6 says, oh, it's going to fix everything. Now we have 6.6.6, and then there's 6.7, and every single time that's what the carrot is. So yeah, it's a case of there are some people who have chosen KDE that are newer, is my opinion, or need some bug fix and they just want it now. I mean, there are people running KDE Neon as a daily. I mean, just go out and I won't say what I was going to say, but just it's insane, to be at that bleeding edge. It's just, but there are people who do it. And again, it's about choice. I make no judgment against them. If you're willing to put up with the pain, so be it.
Oh, you're judging. Let's be honest here.
It's like, well, okay. I don't mean to be judgy. I mean, I think if you're running the literal daily build of something, then you must be masochistic.
Let's turn it back on you just for a second, D-Dubs, because you're a Hyperland user, and Hyperland updates a lot. Do you? I don't think you use like the bleeding edge like Git repo, but you do prefer to have a more recent version of Hyperland, right?
Absolutely. Now, I don't consider once a month, and especially since he's finally calmed down
for now
with all the breaking. Well, we'll see. I don't know.
We'll see. Yeah.
It's been interesting to see the maturity of Vaxry. He actually did a talk not too long ago, as a keynote speaker, and I was actually rather surprised. He's still rough around the edges, but he also has a larger team now, and he's got money coming in. And I believe that's one of the reasons he went to Lua. But yes, I run the current build. For a while, I was running the dev builds just so I could sort of stay ahead, and anticipate problems. But the last 6 months, the only time I did a dev build was when he first announced Lua, because it wasn't available on the main branch. It was actually on his build, his personal branch, I should say. So the breaking changes have calmed down. Like I said, I've been daily driving it for almost 4 years now. So when people say, "Oh, it breaks all the time," I'm like, no, it really doesn't. And I support it, so I see the issues. But yeah, but also there's also a huge difference between Hyperland, Neri, Mango, because they're such smaller projects compared to KDE, GNOME. I mean, those are backed by commercial entities that have budgets that any one of these other projects would dream to have 1/10 of.
And a much larger user base, right? So it's much more acceptable for Vaxry to make a breaking change for the let's just call it a few thousand people that use Hyperland compared to the millions of people probably that use this Plasma, right?
Yeah, the percentages are small.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, there's a huge difference there. But I don't know. It is what it is. But it's also, I guess, if that's what you want. I mean, I want the latest and greatest. Okay. But you're going to have more pain. I don't care what it is. Hyperland, GNOME, I don't care. You're going to have more issues with it. But see, I'm not picking on Drew, but Drew, for example, just wants to use his Linux every day. He doesn't want to tune it. He doesn't want to tweak it. He doesn't want to rice it. He makes it do things. Matt, pretty much you're the same way. I have certain things I have to do every single day. That's why you say unstable. But if, for example, the only way you could run Resolve was to go to unstable, I suspect you would. Because that was if it could run and do everything that you wanted, but you had to be on unstable, you'd be like, okay, I can manage it. So it is about,
this is just bullying now, this freaking guy. Yeah.
So one of the things I like about NixOS, and just real quick, what's really cool about it is that I can, like, say for example in that example, D-Dub, is if I needed resolve on unstable, I can just do that one package, pin it to unstable, and
No, I'm saying for some reason theoretically,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
had to go to unstable because other packages. And if you honestly, if you mix more than like a single package from unstable to stable, you might as well be on unstable. Honestly, it's yes, you could do it, but you'd probably end up with more issues in the long run. I'm just saying, theoretically, for whatever reason,
Mm.
there was something that if you only brought it over, it would like destabilize your system. I'm saying you would do it, because it's that critical to what your daily workflow is. Not just because, oh, I want the latest Hyperland, oh, I want the latest KDE. No, I want this application.
Yeah.
And I wonder, with the generic KDE discussion, I don't know that there's an application that absolutely has to have the latest. There's a little bit of a difference there.
Yeah. KDE is a weird thing where they do seem to. I mean, people got really, really excited about 6.7. And I'm not sure why. Like, it's not like it had a ton of new features or whatever that were like you couldn't get. I mean, yeah, the whole separate monitors on different separate workspaces,
your desktops.
right?
A lot of people ask for that, though. Yeah,
Yeah, and they've been working on it for a long time, and that's cool. But maybe it's just my inherent bias against KDE. Like, I used Plasma for a month. It was actually really stable this time. It has periods where it's actually pretty damn good, and it has a lot of really good ideas. I love the customization of it, but the KDE people that I talk to are like, oh, it's really stable. Like, I haven't had that experience. That it's great that you've had that experience, but like with you in Hyperland, you've had the experience of it being very stable. I can't seem to get it to work for me personally for a constant period of time. Sometimes I can go through months and months and it'll be fine. Sometimes it won't. Mostly probably a me problem. I'll fully admit it. But there's just that experience, right? But the thing I have with KDE people is, like, every time I talk to one, they're like, oh my god, this is the most. It's very stable. I don't know where you're coming off with Big Buggy. The thing with, like, new versions of KDE for me personally is I don't want to. That'd be one piece of software I'd like. No, I do not want the new one. Let it bake for a little while. Let 6.7.1 or .2 come out. It's like it's actually like when a new release of Ubuntu comes out. Like you don't want that first .0 release. You want to wait till the .1 release to update your servers to, because it's going to fix things. Drew, this last time with 13, right? You had problems with Debian 13 when it first came out, right? And those problems didn't get solved until the first like release. Having that first absolute release when something as big as changing as having multiple workspaces on multiple desktop or on multiple monitors, that stuff's gonna break. Like, I just know it's going to. So it's just easier to wait. But we've gotten to the. Go ahead.
I just want to add one real quick. There is also one big difference between KDE and like GNOME is KDE releases so often.
Mm-hmm.
GNOME really doesn't. Not on the scale of KDE. I think that's, you hear about like GNOME 50 and then GNOME 51, or GNOME 49, whatever it is. They seem to be very, very slower and more methodical on their releases. And I think that's not a bad thing for KDE to do. I think they release too often.
Well, I think because they have so many features, they feel that they have to release often enough to fix the bugs that they're constantly creating with everything that they add.
Right, but they seem to also always add new features to every release.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me, if I could just finish, because if you say, okay, 6.6 has X features, and you say this is the feature set, then 6.1 should just be bug fixes for that feature set. But they also add other things, and they don't really like increase the number to say, okay, 6.7. I mean, they should be on like 10 by now. Because if you follow that kind of normal sequence where a major number tells you that's when there's a major change. I mean, that's what I love about Debian. There's a big difference between 12 and 13. and there will be a big difference between 13 and 14, and you know that, you expect that. Same with Ubuntu. They even go with the interim builds, which I appreciate, because it gives you an idea to be prepared for what the next one is.
Yeah.
If you're in a corporation, you run the interim build on test systems to say, is my stuff going to break?
Yeah. So I've talked. So that's exactly what they should do, D-Dubs. But I've talked to several KD devs, and they all say the exact same thing. They can't do it. Like they literally have this pipeline of new features that is like apparently unstoppable, that they can't hold back. I don't think that that's true. I think that that's just a mentality that they have.
I call BS.
Yeah, but that's their answer. Like I talked to what's his name, Nicolo, I think is his name. He does some YouTube videos. That was his answer. Like they cannot stop that train. That they're in testing constantly, and that's just the way that they work. Because my solution for them, like when I was really having problems with KD, and I know we're bashing on the KD guys, and I know you guys who have had your hands raised for a long time. I'm sorry about that. Just one more minute, I promise. My solution when I was really having problems with KD was for them just to stop development on new features for a whole year. Like I'll have a whole year moratorium on new features, no new features whatsoever, and every release they do for that year has to be on solving bugs. Because if you go to the KDE bug tracker and just search for Kwin bugs, there's more Kwin bugs than can show on the bug tracker. Like it just runs out of space, and some of them are 20 years old. Like you could probably get rid of those, probably, but when you have something that has that many bug reports attached to it, and you're still focusing on new stuff, like it feels like you would just but just think, like, let's step back. We're gonna like Apple did this year on iOS. That wasn't a big I hate to praise iOS, but they stepped away. They did a big release last year. This year it was much more about refinement, making it actually more usable. Yeah, they had a few small new features surrounding the AI bullshit, but it was very much more of a release of trying to make it so it was actually usable again. And I think that that's definitely something that KD could do. All right, so enough of that. GNU to Linux, finally, go ahead.
Yeah, what Drew and Cody were talking about, if you're using Linux Mint and you're trying to force KDE on it, you're kind of trying to stick a square peg into a round hole. I wouldn't consider that a limitation of Linux Mint. That's really just not something that's offered. You're either completely ignorant or really, really knowledgeable and wanting to overcome something that you really probably shouldn't bother. You're better off just if you love KDE that bad or that much, or somebody's recommended it to you and you're new and you want to follow their recommendation, they should also direct you to the appropriate distro to use it. Whether that's Kubuntu or one of the other ones. And then I would also say this, going back a few minutes, I think for me, the sweet spot is using an LTS like Linux Mint based on Ubuntu LTS. And if you want updated packages for specific software, because there are indeed some software, a bunch of them, that you want to have the latest, right? You don't need the latest everything. Yeah, I don't want a rolling release distro. I don't want to be bombarded with updates to my system, although I do get a bunch of updates anyway because I got so many programs installed. But you don't want the system, the OS itself, to be updating, that often. But if you're on an LTS, you've got options. You've got, in my case, I prefer PPAs, which is like why I love Ubuntu-based systems so much, because they're small. If you don't care about your hard drive space, you can use flat packs. You've got those options to update the handful or 2 or 3 handfuls of programs that you actually care about having the very latest, while at the same time being on an LTS. To me, that's the sweet spot on Linux, for me at least.
Dragonwood in the chat, GNU to Linux wasn't saying that you couldn't run KDE on Mint. It's just that there's a specific reason why it's not offered out of the box, right? And there's specific on any Debian or Ubuntu based distro, KDE is going to be more of a challenge simply because of the amount of updates that it does get that you're going to be left out on, and because of its inherent instability. You know, if you're using KDE on Debian right now, you're going to be stuck on 6.5 or whatever they have right now, and you're going to be there and unless you do something weird like go to unstable or sit or whatever it is. Maybe then you'll get some extra updates. But if you're on Debian stable, you're going to be stuck on that version of KDE for a long period of time, just like with Mint or Ubuntu. And KDE, and if that works for you, that's fine. But if you end up having like a major bug, you're not going to get a fix for that for a while. That's the reason why KDE tends to work on distros that have better more frequent updates. It's not always the truth. It's not always the case, but it's just kind of mostly true. Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, so I definitely agree that like Katie, gosh dang my freaking camera, stop doing that.
I wondered why you kept holding your hand up. Like, what?
Yeah, it's because of the camera. Like, I would just disable, but the software actually isn't on Linux. But I need to plug it into a different computer.
Is that one of those ones where you can hold your thumb up and it like puts out emojis
yeah, it does,
and stuff?
It's Ozbot Meet 2 or something like that. I don't know. It was a great bang for buck webcam overall. But anyways, so like yeah, like I totally get a lot of people have really buggy experiences with KDE, and there are tons of bugs in the bug tracker that do need to be fixed. Luckily, I don't have a lot of bugs, and most of the time I do have bugs, it's on random other distros or distros I don't normally use. But everyone's experience is different with different hardware, different setups. So it just is what it is. KDE don't work for you, don't use KDE. It's fine. But yeah, so the purpose of like bringing up KDE on Mint was not because they should be using KDE as the main thing on Mint. Would be like on many other distros. Oh, just get another desktop environment, dip your toes for a moment, But with Mint, it's so old. It's not actually in like 6 point whatever. It's still in version 5 of KDE. And I'm not saying like you need the latest version of KDE, but there were some very meaningful improvements in like 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, like that. If you're trying to give someone a good impression of the features of KDE, it would be good, I think, to give them an updated subversion of like 6.3 or something like that, to actually experience that. But like, but yes, because 6.1 had triple buffering, and 6.3 had the fractional scaling overhaul, which is really important if you use high resolution monitors and use fractional scaling at all. And so like the fact that it was only version 5 still was just like, oof, that's not going to give him the great impression when he's already feeling kind of like a little bit rocky on Linux Mint because of some of the problems that he's having. And so it's like, yes, we're trying to massage him over to a very handheld directed cache install. But where this person can handle rolling release, they just need to have their hand held a little bit and be pushed. They're a developer who knows tech and stuff, but it's just very stubborn and doesn't always like to listen.
Why not move them to something like Kubuntu? Like Kubuntu does have a more recent version of KDE than what would be in the. So I mean, we kind of danced around a little bit, but there's the reason why Mint stopped, because Mint had a KDE version for years and years. They stopped offering it because there were so many packages to keep updated. They just couldn't do it. So. And for good reason, I think. So, my question for you is like, this friend of yours, why not just move them to Kubuntu or something like that? They don't have, then you won't have to worry about the rolling release. They'd still be on something stable.
Well, they're fine with the rolling release. That's not a problem for them actually. with Kubuntu, then you're dealing with snaps and everything too. Whereas on something like Cashy, you're getting mostly native packages, and like yeah, you can get Flatpak and stuff like that, but you're just dealing with native packages, and you don't have the extra complication that sometimes comes with someone being exposed to those type of packaging formats for the first time, and they're trying to get a handle on everything else still too. And then also none of his friends are currently running Ubuntu or any of the major Ubuntu based distros that are using snaps or anything either. And so if we want to be able to reproduce any issues he's having and help him through things, it's going to be good to be on something like that. And then also he's on really new hardware. And while you can get drivers and stuff on Kubuntu and any Ubuntu distro, it's not that big of a deal. There's just a few more optimizations out of the box with Catchy on newer AMD hardware.
NixOS would solve all those problems.
I think NixOS would actually be a fantastic thing once they get dipped in a little bit more, because like I do think that NixOS, it can be a developer's like paradise in a lot of ways.
Well, and you talked about reproducibility. You could just take his config and install. All right.
I would like to push them there at some point. The other major friend that we have that that's going to help them hates Nix because it's not doing things Linux standard ways and blah blah blah. They're one of the weird people who just is very contrarian about many things though. So it's
they just want their user folder to their USR folder to be full of stuff. Anyways, D-Dubs, go ahead.
Actually, on a slightly different tact, GNU Linux, you were talking about PPAs. For those who aren't familiar with it, there is an inherent risk to PPAs. It's not a vetted, certified. It's a user-to-user repository. So you just have to be very careful, like with the AUR, same with Copers in Fedora. You have to be very, very, very selective about which ones you use. I just don't want anybody listening to think, oh, PPA. And they find all these PPAs, and you could end up in a pretty bad situation.
Drew, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to. I kind of steered the conversation to this KDE.
No, it's fine. I think it's fun.
Yeah. Initially, my idea was that when you're talking about desktop environments, the need to upgrade just the desktop environments isn't nearly as kind of like critical as it used to be. Individual packages, which was what you kind of like brushed over, Matt, was like, yeah, those are important. Like, for example, I'm still using whatever the Debian stable version of OBS is. I don't even know what version it is. Okay. But it does work for me. Okay. But I know that there are reasons to upgrade for specific use cases. The one that really sticks out in my mind, though, is NeoVim. Okay. For those of you that are NeoVim users, the version on the Debian stable packages is 0.10.4. Okay. We just came out with 0.12.4. So, several generations of NeoVim old. And yeah, it's unusable. I mean, in today's, if you're a NeoVim user, it's kind of unusable at this point. So I get the fact that you want to have certain things on the latest and greatest. I don't know that you need the latest and greatest, but you get my point. It's just at some point, it's too old to be usable. And in that case, 100%, I get that 100%. Yeah. By the way, I do have the 0.12.4 deb on my Butter repo.
And if you'd like that on your actual distro, butterbn.org. I did post it in the chat earlier, Drew.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, use it or don't. I don't care, but because it is truly just Debian with a little wrapper and the ability to run Butter BTRFS with snapshots. That's all it's doing.
I know. I just like Trolling you, man. Trolling you is fun. All right, let's talk about immutable distros, because I know we've mentioned it a little bit, but if there were a category of alternative distros that are, the future of Linux, supposedly immutables, or whatever they're calling them today, are probably going to be that, right? And mostly because there are gigantic corporations working on that technology. So Canonical's working on it, obviously. Fedora and Red Hat are working on it. Whether or not those things ever take over for mainstream Linux, who knows? But there seems to be legitimate purposes behind this trend of creating distributions that are not necessarily unbreakable, but less prone to user tinkering, shall we say. And there are specific benefits beyond just not being able to delete your Etsy file, right? There's the idea of being able to deliver updates that are just top level user space updates only. Or bottom level, system level updates only. There's the idea of being able to reproduce these things on hardware en masse without having to deal with the complexities of something like a config file, but being able to actually install this thing over and over and over again, knowing that it works exactly the same way. The ability to, I know if George Castro was here, he'd be talking about cloud native technologies and all this stuff, right? And I would lose my mind because I don't know what any of that stuff means. But for a lot of developers these days, at least, that's the direction that Linux is going. So I guess my question for everyone here is, what are your general thoughts on, let's just call them immutables because that's what they started off as. What are your general thoughts on immutables? And do you think that is the future of Linux, or at least a future of Linux that we're going to be seeing more and more often as things like the Steam Deck adopt that kind of technology, as Fedora and Canonical go towards that future where if you're going to use Ubuntu, you're going to be using a snap-based version of everything, where even the kernel's probably a snap. Do you think that that's the future that we're living in? Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty obvious reason why a lot of the big Linux companies have been working on immutability to some extent, and it's the area that we haven't talked about at all. It's business computers, business workstations, business laptops, all that sort of thing. Like when you have a work fleet out, whether they're using thin clients or they're using an actual laptop or a desktop workstation, and they're moving away from Windows, where they essentially try to tack on immutability type features onto Windows. They can just have immutability in Linux, fully controlled by their corporate IT department. So the users can do their things. They can get whatever updates that are pushed or approved by IT in user space. And even if the users try to do something, or something malicious gets in there and tries to break something, it's very unlikely it's actually going to be able to. It's just easier, safer, and it's better to maintain in those type of work environments. So as far as Linux for users in business environments, it absolutely is the future. And it's going to it's going to give people a really easy matched experience between whether they're using a thin client connecting to a remote VM, or they're using their corporate issued laptop or desktop workstation. And then other than that, like it's when it comes to console type experiences, they don't want people to break things. That I mean, that's one of the main reasons that SteamOS is immutable. They don't want the users to be breaking things and then complaining and having problems. And they can have more control over what software is running primarily on it and how things are interacting. And users can get around stuff like that, and they allow users to, and that's totally great. But yeah, when it comes to every normal Linux user out there, though, I do not think immutability is going to be the main thing. I do not foresee that in most futures. But as far as people who aren't techie or need other people to control things, that's where immutability is going to take off the most.
Okay, Drew.
I guess I had my microphone on the entire time. Sorry. So when Cody was talking about, it makes a lot of sense when you're talking about thin client, when you're talking about the business application work, you're talking about not wanting people to screw up their stuff. You know, it's like, don't screw this up. We're a multi-billion-dollar industry and you cannot be trusted. When it comes to you and me and the rest of the Linux community that are tinkerers, that are that are looking at this as hobbyists, it's crappy to me, okay? Because, and we all know this, guys, how many times do you post your screenshot of your system on Reddit or some type of Unix porn or something like that? You're basically taking the paintbrush out of our hands. I want to be an artist. I'm not an artist, but my Linux distribution, which is very specific, or my Linux experience is very specific to me. Don't take the paintbrush out of my hand, guys. I want to be able to do stuff that can be, that is specific to me. Does that make sense? I'm kind of floundering here.
No, I think that it makes sense, but I also think that I think that there's this stereotype about immutables that isn't necessarily true, right? Because a lot of people see an immutable like, oh, I can't do anything with it. You know what I mean? There's no tinkering available on an immutable distro. And that's just not, like, if you want to install DWM on Bluefin, you can do that. It works exactly the same as it would install on Fedora or any other Fedora-based distro. You can do that. You can also do it the cloud native way or whatever, which is basically creating your own image and doing it that way. So there's multiple ways, just like there is with any other Linux distro. So there are obviously things that are going to work differently when you're on an immutable distro. Basically anything that's going to interact with your system level files, right? So for example, on NixOS, every once in a while I'll come across a command or something that I'm trying to run, and it will tell me, sorry, can't do this, read-only file system. But very rarely is that the case, and I obviously do a ton of tinkering stuff. Now, NixOS is not a traditional immutable distro, but it does have a read-only file system because everything's stored in the store. But the idea still is kind of the same there. What I find, I think where I see things going isn't that like, oh, everyone's gonna be like nobody's gonna come to your house, Drew, and pry Debian out of your hands, right? Debian's not ever going to go immutable, at least not anytime in the remote anywhere close to the future, right? Same thing with like Arch Linux. Like Arch Linux is never, it's just like DWM is never going to go to Wayland. Like there's certain things are just not going to happen. So I think that like the traditional, more old school way of using Linux is always going to be there, and on some fairly major distros. Like it'll be the way of things for a lot of things. But I do think that the more corporate distros, like Ubuntu, like Fedora, probably open, and in fact like OpenSUSE, those will, I believe, go more the immutable future than the more community-based distros. Whether that's because the community is opposed to immutable distros, or it's just because of the nature of community versus corporate. Because the corporate guys see the benefits of immutable more than the community does.
Different needs.
Yeah. I think that it's much more of a division of the Linux user base than we've probably ever really seen before. Like, we've always had pools of people who use different things. Like, there's the GNOME versus the KDE guys. There's the systemd folks and the people who don't like systemd, and a whole bunch of, we have pools of people within the community, a broader community. But at the end of the day, we're all using basically the same thing. Like, my system, while configured much differently than Drew's, we're both using the Linux kernel at the end of the day. I'm using Xmonad, which he wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. But we're both using window managers. The workflow is somewhat similar and all those things, right? But and I do think that people see the whole immutable versus non-immutable future of Linux as being this completely different thing. I'm not sure that that's actually the truth. I do think that people worry about the control that it gives the corporate-based overlords of those distros, and I think that may be a legitimate concern. I would be interesting if we want to have that conversation later on to do so. But in terms of worrying about, it being two vastly separate things, I don't know that that's the truth. So, Drew, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention too that I think it's kind of a step-by-step process where things became more containerized, and it kind of, like Flatpaks, for example, and I'm used to Debian files, basically a package that you install. And so because of the containerized changes in Linux, it's different, and I think it's just kind of this is where it's going. You have these you have these deb files. Now you have Flatpaks that are containerized, and now you have something completely different. Whereas, and I am worried that things like Chrome OS, for example, becomes a cloud-based OS where you have this, what Cody was talking about, a thin client. It boots really fast, and then nothing else is yours. It goes straight to the cloud, and everything is run off that. And that, to me, is not acceptable. And that is not something, and that would be something that you'd have to pry out of my cold dead hand type thing, whatever. It's where you're just talking about, Matt. Things could be going on the corporate level, an OS that just is not yours any longer, and that freaks me out.
Yeah, I think that's legitimate. I know that the people who are very much behind this technology aren't like George Castro and I have butted heads in the past, but he's not a bad guy. He's not ultimately a corporatist at all. He sees this type of technology as the future simply because it removes the pain. Excuse me. It removes the pain behind Linux in terms of things breaking, things not being reproducible, and he always says that it's not a distro, it's just an operating system. You don't have to worry about it, right? And that's I think that's a legitimate goal behind some of the technology. I just don't think that the people who are funding it are necessarily having the same goals as he does, and not necessarily because of Bluefin having those corporate sponsors, but more the Fedora based and Red Hat based stuff. I'm not sure that that's actually what their ultimate goal is, but I also, maybe it's I know it's suffered to have Matt be the optimist, which it's a weird position for Matt to be in. Also, talking about myself in the third person was really weird there for a second. But I do think that at least part of this move for even the corporate-based entities in this world are more focused on the benefits that it provides enterprises, not necessarily because of the control it offers them, but because of the control it offers their clients, right? Like it's not necessarily that Red Hat is going to be having their greedy little fingers in my operating system. It's more the ability for, name your multinational corporation, have the ability to control the computers on their system. You know what I mean? Like it's basically like having MDM software to control phones and mobile devices. It's basically the same idea as that, and it's something that Windows has had, despite not being immutable forever. The ability to be able to broadly distribute Windows across a vast fleet of hardware, and having it reproducible in that way, and being able to control those because of the tools that Microsoft has built. It's Linux has had some flavors of that, but there's a reason why Linux succeeds on servers in the enterprise and not necessarily on the clients that they offer their employees. And I think that the idea behind immutable is a way to get their foot into that door, being able to offer both the server side of stuff, but also being able to make Linux more feasible on, like a million laptop fleet, being able to just distribute it amongst a whole bunch of employees. Whereas really, right now, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So, Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, it's not that any of these things like reproducibility and distribution able to be distributed across computers and stuff like that. It's not like these things aren't capable and haven't been capable across Windows and Linux for the longest time. All of these different efforts are about making different portions of these desires easier or more attainable in different ways. Um, the point of Chrome OS being brought up, though, that definitely gets into a bit of a dark hole there, because like the whole thing of like Google putting Chrome OS computers into schools all across the United States for the past decade was to get people using their software, their web experience, and get people used to a lot of those things. And it looks more and more that Google is going into the have everything you're doing be interactions with AI. And it's not just the AI that runs on the device necessarily, it's the AI that runs into their servers, which they have control over. It is them that is controlling that the way the information is being grown and distributed within their AIs. Um, and so I don't think it's I don't think it's absurd to think that as Chrome OS morphs into an Android type thing, and then that it morphs further, that it's going to end up in what feels like for a lot of users more control and more freedom, but in reality is more control by the corporation selling it. And we've seen how Windows S mode was not great. No one liked it. And then there was very recently the leaked slideshow from that I think was made like 2 years ago, of essentially what was a reboot of Windows S mode that was the agentic AI version of Windows. And it very much is going into that Microsoft decides how you are going to use your computer and what runs on there and how it works. And you just kind of get to choose how things look, and it feels a bit more personal in some ways, but is really controlled by other entity.
All right. Anybody else have anything else that they would like to say on the immutable stuff before we wrap this thing up? Or any of the alternative distros that we talked about earlier that they'd like to expound upon before we move on to the end of the show? Going once? Twice? All right. So that we made it to full 2 hours. I was, when I first started the show today, I was like, man, this topic is going to bomb, but we pulled it out and we did a really good job. So overall, a fantastic lug as usual, guys. So for those of you who watched live, thank you so very much for joining us. We do really appreciate this. If you want to join us in the future, we do 2 lugs every single month. The first one is this one. Obviously, this is the early lug. I know 12:30 isn't early, but you guys know what I mean. It happens on the second Thursday of the month. It's 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. We usually go for about 2 hours, and it almost always certainly has a topic of some kind. I put a poll out about a week beforehand to vote on, just to let those of you who are regular know this. I'm going to be retiring quite a few of the topics that are on the poll and put out some new ones. Some of those have been on there for quite some time. They're not going to ever win, so we're just going to yoink them off from there, and we'll put some new stuff on there. So we'll freshen the pot up, as it were. So that's the early one. The second one is the 4th Thursday of every month, and that happens at 8:15 p.m. Eastern time. You can join us in the room if you want. You don't have to talk. You don't have to have a microphone or whatever. You can join the Jitsi call, or you can watch us on the stream. I always stream it on the YouTube channel, so you can find that at youtube.com/the Linux Cast. So make sure you subscribe, like, all of that stuff. So thanks everybody for watching. We will see you next time.